Welcome to I Scream, You Scream, your weekly scoop of the most chilling histories, mysteries, and true crime. I'm Gina.
I'm Kathryn.
Every month we choose a new topic and a new flavor of ice cream to go along with it. This month we're talking about poison while we munch on some Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream with pretzels on it that I also forgot to do again.
Me too. I don't even have my dish. I just grab the pint.
You know what? Fuck it.
Fuck it.
Grab a spoon, bitches. Let's dig in. Oh, and we're also having a little drink today because we're recording on a Saturday and we usually don't. So it's a little Saturday treat.
Yeah. Last week, Gina had me craving wine because of our frenemy Rasputin. I just had a hankering.
For some sweet, sweet cyanide.
I cannot stop thinking of that. The fact that he might have survived cyanide poisoning due literally to basically alcoholism is just...
I know.
A story in and of itself. I do have to say before we get going... Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it. I was just about to say I can't add anything else because I'll just won't shut up about it. So keep going.
I was just going to say, I do have to call attention to it in case people see it. We're on the last bit of Ben & Jerry's and I didn't wash my ice cream dish after the last recording. And I'm so lazy this afternoon that I just was like, fuck it. We're going straight from the pint today. So
fucking whatever.
That's the vibe. That's the vibe that we're bringing to this episode. Just want to make it clear right off the bat. It's our last poison episode. So we're going to be rating
We have to rate our ice cream.
Yes. Yeah. Before that, though, I want to say happy 20th episode. This is episode 20.
That snuck up on me. Didn't even think about that.
And technically we have more because we have a couple of little bonuses and shit like that. But this is officially episode 20 per the catalog.
Happy 20th.
Yeah. Happy 20th. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers again.
Yeah, I was cheersing the ice cream. I don't know why I didn't think of actually cheersing the drink.
Oh, we could cheers the ice cream too.
Shit, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, let's rate it. I feel like I know what it is for me. Well, I don't know. Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
I can go first. I am going to give this a 2 out of 5.
What?
Okay.
Wait, plot twist? Okay, I was not expecting that. What?
It's because the homemade ice cream is great. I've enjoyed it, but it doesn't compare to the real thing as far as Cherry Garcia goes.
I'm so sorry.
So I would eat it again, but it's not the same. What about you?
Okay, that's fair. So remember when I rated Orange 5 out of 5?
Mm-hmm.
I liked this maybe better because this is one of my all-time favorites, but I'm gonna rate it less because I'm trying not to compare the ice creams. I'm trying to just go with I'm trying to compartmentalize the ice creams, you know what I mean? And this particular experience, I'm trying not to compare it to that. So I don't want anyone thinking I like it less than orange cream. But there wasn't enough chocolate bits for me. Still one of my favorite Ben & Jerry's flavors. # not sponsored. Not my all-time Ben & Jerry's flavors, but definitely it's top 3.
Okay.
Appreciate the fact that it's dairy-free. That was great. Appreciate the fact that the ice cream is flavored cherry. So it's okay, it's kind of okay that there's not a ton of bits. I also appreciate the fact that the cherries taste fresh and not freeze-dried. With that being said, not enough chocolate bits. And what I would have liked is I wish I had put chocolate syrup on it. I think that would have made it a 5 out of 5 for me. So I'm giving it a 4.75. That's what I'm giving it.
Let's get specific with it. I love it. Are you a chocolate syrup person or a hot fudge person?
Both. Good question. For this particular dish / what I felt like I was missing a gooey chocolate, not necessarily one or the other. I think either one would have given me what I was looking for this. I wanted some type of a gooey chocolate in it. Yeah. Either would have been fine. There's a time and a place for both. I don't like one more than the other.
I'm usually more of a hot fudge person because I like the thickness, the consistency of it. I tend to like more.
Chocolate syrup is just so nostalgic to me. It reminds me of being a kid and Adam and I would go and sneak into the fridge and take turns eating it straight from the bottle. Because we would use it. We only ever used chocolate syrup to make chocolate milk when we were little.
That's
We
what
really
I
didn't
think
do.
about when I hear
Yeah.
chocolate syrup. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think Adam to this day always puts chocolate syrup on his ice cream, though. I could be wrong. Adam, let us know. He listens to the podcast, so let me know if I'm
That's a
wrong.
solid choice.
Hit the link and send us through our story link. Let me know how you let me know what your relationship with chocolate syrup is.
You're only allowed to contact your sister via form submission. Thank you.
Yeah. But for the rest of you, if you want to use that link, we would love you to send us your stories. But in the meantime, do we want to get going with this story? I have a couple bites left of ice cream. I just realized before I said that, so let me.
Oh, actually, that's okay because I have an update on something that I talked about last week. So I finished that book, and I do recommend it. I don't cry at books often. This book made me cry at the end. That's all I'm going to say because I don't want to ruin anything. But
we'll link it
if you're looking for something heavy. It's linked in last week's show notes, and I'll link it again in this one. Yeah. But I am so fucking excited about today's episode.
Me too. So I'm going to jump right in. I'm so bad at these transitions. I'm sorry. So today we are talking about Lavinia Fisher. Starting from the beginning, Lavinia Fisher lived in Charleston, South Carolina, and she was born in 1790. And that concludes literally everything we know for 100% certain about her as far as her background and upbringing. There's not a lot of records of anything, not a lot of information out there about her life before today's stories, leading to a whole lot of speculation on the who, what, when, where, why, and how of her story. Even though she really is a real woman who actually existed, many sources refer to her story as, quote, the legend of Lavinia Fisher, because there has been so much room for speculation and so much room for kind of fictionalizing things. She has become kind of this larger than life legendary figure, and the actual events that take place, just as with all of our other stories, grain of salt with everything. And I'm not going to cover all of the speculation and everything because there's just so many questions asked about her and so many assumptions made. We can't fit it all into one. So I'm going to, similar to a lot of your recent stories, I'm going to focus on the most popular theories and versions of her story. So, like I said, the legend of Lavinia Fisher, that in and of itself is the best way to describe who she was. She is a mystery first and foremost. Up until recent years, she has been described as America's first female serial killer. That may well be true. Like I said, there are versions of the story that we just simply don't know for sure. She very well could have murdered many people, but we're going to kind of explore that and see what may have really happened in today's story. Like I said, Lavinia Fisher lived in Charleston, South Carolina, with her husband, John, and together they owned an inn called the 6 Mile Wayfarer House. For all anyone knew, the Fishers were a well-liked couple. They never had any drama with their neighbors. No one had an issue with them. They had a lot of friends, and they were just generally really well-liked. No one had anything particularly bad to say about them. Lavinia was described as being charming and kind, and she got along really well with everyone, particularly the women of Charleston. Like I said, she had a lot of friends. No one had anything bad to say about either of them, but particularly Lavinia. Lavinia was described as being very well-liked. They were just your average couple who made their money who made their living running an inn. The inn that they ran was 6 miles north of Charleston, which is where the name 6 Mile Wayfarer House comes from.
Branding, baby.
Right, I know. Very literal. What a great keyword.
So optimized for search, even back then.
Right. Yep. I imagine they've got a very successful Google business profile. So, in the mid-18th century, Charleston was a huge hub for trade. Unfortunately, sorry to take the mood down immediately, the biggest source of trade in Charleston at the time was the transatlantic slave trade. Ships carrying enslaved people came in from numerous ports across many countries in Europe, Africa, and South America. So the volume of people coming into Charleston was just absolutely huge because the number of ports coming into America was much bigger than the ports in America going back out. So
Got it.
Charleston just
Okay.
had a huge volume of people coming in. The transatlantic slave trade was abolished in the United States in 1808. However, the domestic trade wouldn't be abolished until 1865. Beyond that, it wasn't just ships carrying enslaved people that would come into Charleston. There were also products and goods coming in as well. So it was just a huge hub of many different ships coming in from many different places. There was a huge volume of people coming into Charleston. And, so this means that the entire time that Lavinia and John were living there, they had basically a ginormous clientele and an opportunity to have people come and stay at their inn. Owning an inn in a port city like Charleston was, and still is, obviously a brilliant way to make money. They just had basically a never-ending supply of customers coming through. It was said that the money coming in from the steady stream of merchants and travelers wasn't enough for the Fishers. They wanted more. How did they plan to get more from their travelers? Roadside robbery. How did they plan to rob them? By murdering them. So, here's how they would do it. Yes, here's how the legend goes. A traveler would come in, and Lavinia would be there to greet them at the inn. Right off the bat, she would take notice. Was he young, kind of inexperienced, a lower class sailor, or did he seem like he had been working for a while and was making a good living? What kind of clothes was he wearing? Did he look like he had a lower class kind of manual labor job, or was he clean, put together, seemingly higher in ranks? After she basically profiled him, asking a few leading intro questions, she would determine where she thought he fell in the ranks, and she would send the lower class men on up to their rooms and leave them alone for the rest of the night. If she determined they likely had some money, she would invite them to continue the conversation over a cup of tea. She'd ask about their lives, their families, what kind of fun they like to have, and inevitably things tended to get a little flirty, encouraging the men to kind of lower their guard and give her perhaps more information than they usually would about their income or assets, things like that. After they parted ways for the evening, she would creep up to their room later that night, and she would find the men dead in their beds, as the tea Lavinia would serve them was made from white oleander. Some information about white oleander. It's a plant native to the Mediterranean region and parts of Africa, Asia, and I think specifically China, but I'm not sure. That's why I found it in a few places. Regardless, it is considered an invasive weed here in America, and it is illegal to intentionally plant in some parts of the country. Not all, but it's illegal both due to how poisonous it is, but also just because it's invasive and can threaten local ecologies. Every part of the plant is toxic and can be fatal to humans if you ingest it. Even if you burn it and inhale the smoke, that can also be fatal as well. So even though it's not illegal to plant in some parts of the US, I do believe it is illegal to burn in all parts of the US. Like if you're outside weeding, you can't like throw it in your like fire pit or whatever. It contains cardiac glycosides, which can cause a victim to have cardiac arrhythmia and eventually die. So essentially, these men would drink the tea, go into cardiac arrest, and die. A while after everyone retired for the night, like I said, Lavinia would go up to the special room that she had intentionally assigned them to. What was going on in the special room? Basically, the bed was said to be equipped with a special lever, and she'd pull the lever, and their bodies would be dumped into the basement, leaving her free to rifle through their belongings and gather like cash or items of value that could be sold.
That's like some H.H. Holmes shit.
Yep, that's how, yeah, that's often, I don't want to say they're often compared to each other, but she is talked about in the category of that
murder hotels,
era or type of person.
Makes
right.
sense.
Yeah. If any of them survived the poison and the subsequent fall, it is said that her husband John would ultimately, quote, finish them off once they fell into the basement. As the legend goes, one night a man named, I think, John Peoples, it was either Peoples or Peoples, stopped at the inn on his way to Charleston from Georgia. And Lavinia pulled the usual plan. Everything was, going according to plan, or so she thought. She was schmoozing with him and giving him tea, except what she didn't know is he didn't like tea. So he was only pretending to drink it. When she came up to the room, he was pretending to be asleep because he thought someone was like breaking into his room. And when she dumped him into the basement, he allegedly landed amongst these bodies, fled, told the authorities. Drama ensues. Okay. So,
Ooh.
yes, this is the legend of Lavinia Fisher. This is the story that was told about her as early as when these things were allegedly happening. This is not a story that grew over time. This is information that her friends and neighbors got when the story broke. The issue is there is not a single piece of concrete evidence that any of this actually happened, other than the fact that John Peoples and in a couple other versions of the story, there are other, quote, eyewitnesses that this happened. No one ever found actual evidence of any of this happening. There were no bodies ever found in their basement. There was no lever found in any room. And there wasn't really anyone reported missing in relation to the inn. Like, there were the kind of abstract adjacent people like, oh, like this traveler went missing, but there was never ever direct connection between someone staying at the inn and immediately going missing. So how did this story come to be? Who would start rumors like this about the Fishers, specifically Lavinia? Stay tuned because I am not going to tell you yet. First, we're going to talk
Okay.
about her trial and execution.
Fuck.
So, first and foremost, it needs to be said that, again, the people in Charleston were mostly on her side. Like I said previously, particularly the women. The women of Charleston were not happy to see one of their own being put on trial for anything. They were horrified that a woman was being arrested, accused, tried, all of it. They were like, absolutely not. She could not have done this. Some people genuinely believed she was innocent. Some people were like, I know her. She's kind. She's wonderful. We love her. There's no way she could have done this. The rest of them were likely just didn't want to see one of their own going through this because that meant they too were not safe. Like kind of upper class money making women were like, oh God, if Lavinia can be accused of something that, whether she did or didn't do it, that means none of us are safe. Because at the time, it was very unheard of for a woman to be charged with a crime like this. Like I said at the beginning, she is known as the first female serial killer. So no one had ever heard of a woman going, excuse me, I'm like starting to get out of breath. I'm starting to get to that part of the story where I'm like, listen. Okay. No one had ever heard of a woman going through this before. So they were all very scared and, kind of fighting for her so that they themselves could feel safe. So for whatever reason any woman may have had, they all, if not most, were on her side and actively fighting for her and speaking out on her behalf. Yeah. Very much a women supporting women and not all the purest of intents, but like the outcome was the same,
Love it anyway.
So, right, exactly. Like whatever you got to do, it's fine. Support, like women supporting women. That's all we care about.
Yep.
Well, unfortunately, in my opinion, anyone else can have their own opinion. She was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. She maintained her innocence until her very last breath. She was afraid to die. She did not want to die. She genuinely believed that she was going to be pardoned from this crime. She was begging to be set free up until the moment of her hanging. She really had faith that someone was going to come forward with enough proof so that the judge would overturn her conviction and she would be set free. Her actual execution is one of the most famous in American history and one of the most, I'm going to say, legendary and talked about and kind of discussed. She is thought to be the first woman to ever be hanged in Charleston, possibly the only woman. I don't know the validity of that 100%, but she was definitely at least one of very few. So it was a notable execution. To the shock of onlookers, she chose to wear her wedding dress to her own execution. Mm-hmm. She also had I know. I knew you were going to like that. I didn't know
Ooh,
if
I
you
like
knew that
that.
part.
I
I didn't
didn't
know
know.
if you
There's
knew
so much
that.
of this that I
Okay.
don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big, and that'll come up later, but yeah, that's a big part of why. Well, yeah, let me continue
Okay.
because that's a big part of her story. So, in addition to that, she also had some of the most famous last words in the country's history, which were, quote, "If any of you have a message to send to hell, give it to me and I'll carry it." So, yeah, I know.
Oh my God.
So, this, combined with the wedding dress, started rumors that she saw herself as like the devil's bride. There's this big aura of, Satan's mistress, and that's why she was this evil serial killer and she did all these bad things. It was all for Satan. It like got real demonic real fast. So she went down in history as this evil femme fatale who didn't give a single lonely little fuck. She was just out to murder men for fun. That has been her legacy that we have known, again, up until recent years. Because the problem is, as with her actual crimes, is not the entire story of her execution either. When it was time for her to be hanged, she refused to step up to the gallows. She wouldn't move. She started yelling and screaming and like damning the governor for choosing to hang a woman, and more importantly, an innocent woman. Like I said before, she maintained her innocence up until the very last moment. At one point, this part breaks my heart, which is why I wanted to include it, just to kind of like humanize this legend of a woman. At one point, she saw the executioner unfolding and reading a piece of paper. She started crying with relief, thinking it was her pardon, but it wasn't. He just said, "This is about a completely different matter. It has nothing to do with you," and forced her up to the gallows, and she was executed.
Fuck.
Yeah. After the execution, when her last words were printed in the paper, somebody who was there wrote in to the newspaper saying that that's not entirely what she said. The last words that were printed were only part of what she said. The witness said, instead of saying, quote, "If you have a message for hell, send it with me, etc., etc., she said, quote, "If you find me so evil, give me your message for hell, I'll carry it with me." So that
Okay.
changes the connotation
It
quite a
totally
bit.
does.
Yes. So she wasn't saying, "I'm Satan's mistress, I'm going home to hell, fuck you, whatever." She was saying, "You're all ridiculous as to think that I am this evil. And, if I was that evil, you might as well just give me this message if you think I belong in hell." You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's a very different connotation. That one little qualifier changes the whole meaning of her
Because
last
I did
words.
think it was odd when you said the original
Mm-hmm.
version, and I was like, oh, that makes it sound like she thinks she's going to hell, which is at odds with her pleading
Mm-hmm.
innocence. But it makes so much more
Mm-hmm.
sense with that context.
Yeah. Yeah. She was not proud to be going down for these crimes like, the historical version of her last words would suggest. Like you just said, there's like a disconnect there. She was calling out how ridiculous it was and like pointing out that nobody thought she was guilty except for the judge for some reason. You know what I mean? Like, yeah,
Hmm.
there was a disconnect, and that letter still exists, to my knowledge, or a record of that letter still exists. I think the Charleston Historical Society has it. I don't remember, but yeah, there is record of it being sent, but no one talked about it. It was just kind of like, that's not going to sell a newspaper, so that was never really
Yeah.
discussed. So let's, back up. How do we, beyond these last words, how do we know she's likely innocent? Here's where I get a little grumpy. It's because there is ample record of someone coming for the Fishers' land. For a long time before all of this happened, somebody was trying to get them to move off of their property, and they continually refused. They continually were asked to sell their land, and they refused. They had no reason to sell their land. They didn't want to. What kind of entity has the power to stage an entire serial killing plot, find an innocent couple guilty, and ultimately have them murdered for fake crimes to take care of their land? The US freaking government does. So,
No way.
way. I'm right this
Fuck.
time.
Okay.
So,
I'm ready.
the federal government had been badgering them for a long time. I couldn't find an exact number. Some people say they were being bugged for years. Other people say several months. Like, for whatever reason, there's documentation that people from the government were trying to buy that land immediately after the Fishers were executed, because John was executed too. I'll talk about that in a second. The government took control of their land immediately after they died. And to this day, it is the site of the Charleston's sheriff's office. So it is still the state government's property. So they've had it all this time. Yeah. So
That's kind of a smack in the face, isn't it? We're going to build a justice building on a
right.
You know what I mean?
Justice building. Yes. Oh my God. Yes. I'm calling federal offices that from now on. Justice. There's another justice building. So a lot of people ascribe to this theory that, this whole thing was just some big government plot to take control of their land. As with any story, there's so much room for speculation. There are so many rumors for things that, could have actually happened. That is based on what I found and based on how quickly the government scooped up their land. That seems to be the most agreed upon answer, or, true story or whatever. But there is a lot of other speculation, at least in terms of why they specifically were targeted and why it was like, even if this was true, why their land? Why did they go after them specifically? So I'll talk about that in a second, but as far as John is concerned, there's not a lot of information on his story. There is a story about a prison break. I'm not going to go into detail of like the logistics of that, because that's another one. Like, there's a lot of it is rumors, but there is a story about how when they were imprisoned for their crimes, they were at the old city jail, also commonly known as the Old Charleston jail. There is a story about him breaking out and coming back for Lavinia, but he was captured, but they didn't make it out. So there's a little bit of like a Bonnie and Clyde element to the story as well. Beyond that, like, there really isn't much on him. People really latched onto the fact that we're dealing with a femme fatale. People loved telling the story, and still do, love telling the story of the first female serial killer in America. And the story of the Fishers kind of became the story of Lavinia Fisher. Like, people kind of just forgot John was involved in this at all, really. What's interesting is, in addition to there not being a lot of information about their background, but there are no birth or marriage records either, at least that not only I couldn't find, but a lot of other people are like, no one knows where they are, or like where they could be or anything like that.
That's weird.
So we only have their birth years. We don't even know what day she was born. And we assume they were married because of their relationship, but we don't know for sure. We also know that they're buried in Potter's Field in Charleston, and like, that's about it as far as records, like official records, are concerned. So part of that has kind of led to one of the rumors that I stumbled upon. Is the reason someone was targeting them in the first place was that Lavinia may have been a white passing, either black or mixed race woman. And like, someone just didn't like the fact that a black woman was making money and running an inn. So that could have been something that like led to this big conspiracy and government plot, or whatever it may have been. I looked into this a little further just to see what the validity was, and there are records of the Fisher family. I don't think it was John specifically, but like his parents and grandparents and all of that, having enslaved people in their home, one of which was named Lavinia. So people wonder if Lavinia Fisher, could have been that woman's daughter.
Oh, fuck.
Trigger warning. I feel like a lot of us know this, but for those who don't, a lot of mixed race people of that time were a result of the man of the house raping the enslaved woman in their home. So this isn't a super far-fetched theory. I did find a lot of dispute on this, and the fact that Lavinia was not an uncommon name of the time. it wasn't uncommon for people to share the same names as enslaved people in the home, because a lot of people were quote unquote renamed once they were in a white family's home. So it was possible that it was just a coincidence that this woman married into a family where there was a name Lavinia, but we don't know. That's, that again, like, this is one of those stories, there are so many rumors, that is one thing that is presented. uh Basically, yeah, this is I still have more to say, but basically this is another story where we will never know for sure what exactly happened or why, or like how we got, to where we are with this story. What, like, she could very well, this all could very well just be true, and all of the speculation and rumors are just a result of like not wanting to, like, admit that she was a bad person, or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of speculation on whether or not there is validity to this. What is generally agreed upon now is she was likely wrongfully convicted and likely completely innocent. Like, there isn't really a lot of like, oh, she's innocent of this but probably did that. Like, people are in agreement that she likely was just targeted for some reason and literally didn't do anything wrong at all. At most, the only thing that people agree that she could likely be not innocent of, or what's the word I'm looking for? Guilty. The word's guilty. At most, everyone basically says she could be guilty of highway robbery or like petty theft, but nothing even close to what would warrant death by hanging, So
Yeah.
yeah, even that, there's no like super concrete evidence of that other than the fact that they ran an inn and like people were robbed sometimes. Um, at the very least, there definitely is no real evidence that she had any connection to Satan or anything like that. And it is it is proven that her last words were taken completely out of context and that had no bearing on her life whatsoever. Like, she was a good Christian woman,
Oh, I feel
as
bad
they
for
say.
Lavinia.
I know. This is one of those ones I'm like, man, she's like one of those women that, like, she does have a lot of notoriety, and a lot of people are like, oh, cool, like, a woman, like, standing up for herself and, like, being crazy and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, that actually wasn't what happened. Like, she was being,
Yeah.
I'm going to say looked up to, because a lot of people do look up to her, but she's being looked up to for the wrong things. Like, she was an innocent woman that was taken advantage of, and that's pretty much it. I will say all of this, the legend of the living woman who was Lavinia has led to her infamous spectral legendary stories as well. That is to say, the woman who was executed in her wedding dress went on to become a woman in white.
Oh.
Yes, yes. So she is Charleston's woman in white. It is said that she is often seen wandering the grounds of the old city jail, again, also known as Old Charleston Jail. That is where she was imprisoned for a year before her execution. There are also whisperings of a lady in white that haunts the Unitarian Cemetery in Charleston. Some people say that that is also Lavinia, but that's not where she's buried, and she doesn't really have any connection to that land at all. So that's debatable. No one really, I don't want to say no one, but a lot of people kind of dispute that that's her as well. But there have been numerous sightings of a woman in white at the jail. Very much agreed upon that that is Lavinia. As far as the jail is concerned, it is a historical landmark, and people of all ages can take a ghost tour there, though it is not recommended for younger children because sometimes it can get a little bit spooky. The history of the jail itself, I'm not going to go too deep into it because that's not what this episode is about, but it is really fraught, and there's a lot going on with this jail in and of itself. Aside from the Lavinia Fisher story, there's a lot of dark energy there, a lot of history specific to like the Civil War and just southern US, it's in and of itself is just super haunted. The history there is just so rich and convoluted, and there's so much going on. And this very much has that kind of almost like a Southern Gothic kind of haunting vibes. So to summarize the energy of this jail, I found a quote from a ghost tour guide named Sarah, who works for Bulldog Tours. Not sponsored, this is just who runs the tours on the jail. So this is what she had to say. While our ghost tour of the old Charleston jail is spooky, it is also a building that carries fascinating elements of Charleston's history. Did you know that the jail was used as a Union prisoner of war camp for all 4 years of the Civil War? The Confederacy sent hundreds of Union soldiers to the building to be held in putrid, overcrowded conditions. Notably, the surviving soldiers from the all-black 54th Massachusetts Regiment, made famous in 1989 film Glory, were held at the jail after their failed assault on Fort Wagner in 1863. You'll have to brave the spirits in the building to come on tour and learn more about the history. So this is just one snippet of there's a lot of little stories like this, that make this jail super prominent to Charleston's history. And Lavinia is really just one part of that.
Okay, I definitely have things to say about Lavinia, but before I get to
Yes.
that, hauntings that involve old prisoner of war camp. We talked about it in the Bloody Mackenzie episode a little bit.
Yes,
There's something particularly chilling about that.
That's part of why I don't want to go super into the jail, because this is very much like I'm in editing mode. I had to check one more thing, and then I learned, I find this quote, and I was like, but this prison in and of itself. There's something about a haunted jail that just hits different than or a prison or jail.
Like when
general.
we went to Kilmainham.
I was going to mention that. Yes. Yeah. On top of the fact that it's like a prisoner of war, these are people that are innocent, in terms of
they're just following,
you're just
what they've been told to do.
What you're doing. Yeah, exactly.
Which I know is, people said that about the Nazis, so it's not the greatest excuse. I know. But hopefully you guys know what I mean.
Well, and also these were Union people.
Yeah.
These were Northerners.
They were the good guys.
There's a lot to say about the Civil War that we are not going to cover now.
Nope.
That's a different episode if we ever even do one, which I would prefer not to.
I'm going to need to be so drunk.
Oh my God, I know. I don't even want to touch that. The fact that this was even in Charleston in the 18th and 19th centuries, I was already like, oh God, I hate it. I did not want to. But it is important, and this is a huge part of the history, and that is a big part of the story, and that is the era in which her story takes place, and that really lends to the whole there could have been a race issue going on with her, and I think that that's worth talking about if that is true, because that was there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. You know what I mean?
That was my main thing I want to unpack a little bit, is that I've heard the story of Lavinia Fisher told. I'm not going to say many times, but quite a few times at this point.
But you've heard it, yeah.
Never once have I heard someone say she was very likely innocent. And never once have I heard someone brought up that there was likely something to do with race that fed into her being found guilty erroneously. And so I'm kind of pissed off about that, because that seems like a really fucking important part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I don't know. Right now, that is kind of viewed as a rumor, but in the way that, similar to so many stories that we've talked about, it's a rumor in the way that it was never looked into or discussed early enough for it not to be. You know what I mean? There is evidence of it, and due to these things that people don't want to talk about or acknowledge, it would make sense,
Yeah.
But we don't talk about those things, and we don't want to acknowledge that stuff was going on. So therefore she was just Satan's wife. And let's not talk about what actually may have been happening,
I'm curious, and I don't know if there's information available about this, but if they found no evidence, how could they find her guilty? There were no bodies. There was no lever. Like, was it just
Well,
the verbal
because
testimony?
yeah, that's a good question. Couple things. I feel like this is one of those. I mean, you said this a couple times in your stories. If this happened today, she would not have been found guilty.
Yeah.
This is very much this trial was happening in 18 whatever. I don't even remember what. I don't think I said what day. She died at 27.
She was 27?
Yeah. They both
That
were.
is
I believe they
so
were both
young.
27. Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. That's another one. Back
And they
then, she was
owned
like an
an
old
inn?
maid by then. Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
spinster age.
I
Yeah.
mean, 27's different than it is 2025.
I'm like, she was a child bride.
And
What
she
are
was
we
a baby.
talking
No,
about?
they had been married for years at that point.
God.
But yes, like, yes, she's like OG member of the 27 Club. But
I didn't even think about that. Oh.
I don't know. I will say, so there were no bodies found in the basement. They did find, I read this. This is one of those things that I don't know if this is officially true, but this is part of the story.
Okay.
Allegedly, as the legend goes, they found 2 bodies buried nearby. One was a traveling merchant guy. Another one, I believe, was a woman that was unidentified. And that was it. I mean, that could have been used as like a
God.
that, do you know what I mean? So there was evidence, but as with a lot of these stories, it was circumstantial, and the main piece of evidence, which held a lot more weight than it does now, was the eyewitness testimony. So that, that was it. That was enough then to put some away, especially this question lends to the government being involved, because you don't have to have any evidence. The government can say whatever they
True.
want, and they can influence the judge to decide whatever they want. You don't need to have any evidence. You can make up lies.
And they could pay
That's
off the
that.
guy, the witness, to say
Exactly.
whatever they want. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's why a lot of people find a lot of credibility to this government wanting their land story or rumor or whatever, because that would explain your question about how could she be found guilty.
This is bringing me back to our very first episode when you were telling me about Elizabeth Bathory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a similar feeling of like, I mean, I feel like we talk about this so much, but I thought I knew this fucking story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, the mind doth
Right.
boggle at how regularly history fails women.
That's the thing. Yeah, it's, how interesting that John was just kind of not part of this at all. If he allegedly
Yeah.
was part of the murdering, if you Google John and Lavinia Fisher, there's like very little comes up. If you Google Lavinia Fisher, so much comes up. Yeah.
Like
And it's
John
like
was all
that
in the story, in the versions I've heard, John's always been like a footnote.
I didn't even know about John. I thought she was just working on her own, and like until I started researching this. Yeah.
God.
I never knew about him at all. Anyway, yeah. There's a lot of, this is definitely one of those like convoluted, I'm interested to see how people talk about it now. So this is another call to action. If anyone listening has toured the jail, I would love to know how people are presenting the tour, because I did find a story online that suggests that people are still presenting it as like she was this evil satanic witch. And I'm curious, it's about 4 or 5 years old, but I'm gonna read it now. I have thoughts on it, but
Okay. Oh no.
I do want, before I get to it, if anyone's gonna hop out early or turn us off, let us know if you've ever been to this jail, because I'm curious what your experience was there. But I'm going to read this story. It was posted by a Reddit user, I don't know, what, CBenj167. And the title is Scratched on Tour at Old Charleston Jail, Paranormal Activity in the Home Following. And I will say I'm only going to read part of it because it is quite long, but we'll link it if anyone, wants to read more. Okay. It says, a few weeks ago when I decided to go on tour of the old Charleston jail in Charleston, South Carolina, I had an experience I cannot explain. I am a nanny, 23 female, and I had the opportunity to accompany my employers on a trip. The evenings were my own to explore, and despite being a little nervous because I never really travel alone, I decided to be adventurous. Barely 15 minutes into the tour guide tells us the infamous story of Lavinia, the demented innkeeper woman that trapped,
Oh,
robbed, and killed men. I know.
demented. Jesus.
Let's pause for a sip.
Chin chin. Jesus Christ.
She was subsequently hanged at the jail in her wedding dress and still exists as a vengeful spirit on the grounds who is known to scratch people. And then it says, ooh, spooky, in parentheses. As he's telling us this story, my head and neck start getting hot. And I mean burning hot. My neck starts to furiously burn/tingle, and I become so woozy I ask the tour guide to point me toward the bathroom. He looks at my neck and asks me if I had a dark red mark on my neck before the tour. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I couldn't believe what I saw. A scratch, almost the perfect size of a woman's fingernail, was raised on my neck. I had just been in the bathroom before the tour, and this was a very clear, distinctive mark that was not there before. The tour guide took a picture and even said that it was the most prominent one he has ever seen. In parentheses, it says, I'm also very pale, though. LOL.
Relatable. I get that.
Right, yeah. The craziest part was the mark just kept getting hotter, redder, and increasingly more painful as the tour went on. It was as if Lavinia or someone else was continuing to bother me throughout the tour. By the next morning, the mark was almost completely faded into a pale pink line on my collarbone. Now, for the part that's really been bothering me, a little backstory that I think might be related. Last year, I had a severe medical emergency, and it was the closest I have ever been to death. Prior to this event, when visiting supposedly haunted locations or going on ghost tours, I felt hardly anything, maybe goosebumps or the hairs on the back of my neck standing up because of, quote, negative energy at most. However, this was my first ghost tour since my medical emergency, and during my entire visit at this jail, I felt constant energy, and this time it was emotionally jarring/torturous. After the scratch, it felt like I was being confronted with that life-changing moment over and over, even though the stories being told were clearly about the people long dead. I couldn't stop sobbing the rest of the tour. I am still a skeptic and have always tried debunking this in my mind. Despite my skepticism, I have always made sure that I make it clear that no negative spiritual energy is to follow me, attach itself to me, etc. However, last week I had a moment at home that seriously terrified me. I was standing in the kitchen near the sink, completely alone in my apartment, when I heard a deep, low growl right in my ear. And I mean growl. All caps. It was so real that I whipped my head around and yelped. My roommate was in a completely different state. I don't have any pets, and I had never heard this sound before. It didn't sound like an animal at all. It was like an angry person gurring right in my ear. It's approaching the year anniversary of my close-to-death experience, and I'm starting to feel crazy and like it's all psychological. However, these recent events leave me unable to reason, and honestly, I'm looking for a different explanation. I've felt presences around me in the apartment sometimes, but I just played it off as commonplace tricks of the mind, but this one feels more than that. So, that's the story.
Fuck.
I will say...
Yeah.
I mean,
you
go ahead. Yeah.
No, you go.
I mean, based on everything we know, I definitely don't think that that's Lavinia. And I will say, I'm not questioning this person's experience at all. This is another one. Who was it? I think... Oh, when I was talking about the cemetery in Old Town, and I was talking about how that one guy, like Yankee Jim or whatever they called him, I don't know, what was his name? Do you know who I'm talking about?
I know who you're talking about, yeah.
He's described as this really negative energy, and I'm like, is that because he was actually a bad person, or is it because they did him dirty? And that's kind of the same vibe I'm getting with Lavinia. And my question is, like, if she was innocent and now her spirit's trapped at this jail, like, I'd be fucking scratching bitches too. Like, I'd be so mad. I would be so mad. But also, all of this is to say, that's why I bring up this jail in and of itself is a whole different story and a whole different episode, because, if this was a Civil War prison, there is a lot of negative energy there. So I would definitely say that, could the scratch have been Lavinia? Maybe. But that sounds a lot more demonic than, but that's part of her story. Like, if you're going with the Satan's Bride version of her story, that would make sense. But so that's why I'm curious how these tours go now, because it sounds like they're still giving tours like that, and there's not a lot of like, oh, this is what used to be thought about Lavinia, but here's what we know now. But again, this post is 4 or 5 years old, so I am curious if they're still telling that version of the story.
Yeah, sad to say. It wouldn't surprise me if they were telling the.
Me too.
You know what I mean? And that's not
Yeah.
like that jail specific thing. It's just in general from a business
It's a
perspective.
jail
You
thing.
make better money telling the story that is more intriguing and like, oh, this evil woman, rather than, hey, no, this woman was like probably wronged and wrongfully found guilty and shit. And I completely agree that if I was Lavinia in her shoes and I got the opportunity to come back as a ghost, I would absolutely scratch bitches. I'd be so fucking mad.
Me too. Yeah, I'd be so pissed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would. Yeah. Full rage mode. I wonder if after someone dies, if they die, I don't know what word to use, like on bad terms. If they, if they're like wrongfully convicted or something like that, and there's a lot of rage or whatever, I wonder if you can you turn into a demon? You know what I mean? Like, you're consumed with rage in the afterlife, and you become maybe not a. I don't know what the definition of demon
might be more.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll have to look into that. I don't know like the technical official words for things. I don't know if demon is like a specific thing and you just turn into like a negative entity, or if you can literally turn into a demon. I don't know.
I think it depends. I think there are a lot of different answers depending on who you ask. That's my guess.
True.
I don't know that for a fact.
That's true. Yeah.
But I would love to come back as a demon.
I know you would.
Yeah, or Satan could come back as my husband.
Yeah, yeah. I already have Satan over here at my house.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, there's a lot of Satan talk over here. We'll talk about that sometime. Stay tuned.
Well, dude, thank you for doing that research. Because that was the episode that I didn't know that I needed. I had no idea what to expect walking into this episode, except to have what I thought I knew turned around. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm so happy that I did this episode, because I almost did something else for my final poison story, and I'm so glad I didn't, because I was like, I had that feeling of like, oh, everyone knows the story of Lavinia Fisher. You know what I mean? I was like, do I really need to tell this story? Like, everyone knows this story. But then I was like, holy shit, what the fuck is this story? I've never heard this before. Yeah. And there's a lot more to it. I definitely encourage people to look into it, because I told the most agreed upon based on what I could find version of the story, but there's a lot of speculation. There are so many things that people think could be true. I just plucked the ones that I found the most often. So
I love episodes that lead to a rabbit hole. Those are my favorite.
Yeah, to the point I'm not even going to link anything. I invite and encourage people to go on this journey on their own. Like,
hell yeah.
Yeah, it was a wild ride. But yeah, that's all I have. Cool. Thanks for joining me. Okay, so yeah, we rated our ice cream. Next month, do you want to share it? I don't know. I've been talking this whole time.
I'm always the one to share it. Do you want to share it?
Okay, yeah. Okay, cool. Yes, I'll share it. So next month, starting next week, we will be talking about werewolves. Ooh, I'm so excited. I love a werewolf story.
And we have some really good episodes queued up. I'm so excited about these topics.
I don't think I know either of yours. I don't think.
I think
I might know of one, but I don't know the details.
I definitely know one of yours, but I don't know any of the details about it. It's just because of where I am from that I know of it.
Yeah, same. So in addition to talking about werewolves, we are going to be making our own / eating Blue Moon ice cream.
Yum.
tune in. We definitely encourage you guys to find/make your own Blue Moon ice cream. I don't know how to make Blue Moon ice cream. I tried Googling the ingredients once and it was like, we don't know, but it kind of tastes like this. So it's gonna be a wild ride.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, much like the wild experiences that wolves have upon the full moon. So, as I stroke my mane.
Exactly like that. Yes.
Yes. Cool. So we look forward to seeing you in March. And until then, keep it cool.
Keep it creepy.